What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to my next positional rankings video for the 2025 NFL Draft. Today, we are going to be navigating this linebacker class, which is, I would say, the thinnest and, dare I say, worst position group in this entire draft class. Not to say there aren't fun players to talk about here today, though, so looking forward to it. As we get started, if you could please take just a second to hit that like button. I really do appreciate it. But above that, make sure you're subscribed, and I do want to remind you guys, I will be live here on draft weekend, night 1, night 2, and yes, every pick of day 3 of the draft as well, hanging out with you guys in the comments, reacting, grading, giving my analysis to every single pick. So just want to remind you guys to come back for the live stream starting next Thursday. But with that, let's go ahead and get started with this linebacker class. And this video is going to look a little different than our other positional rankings videos because, like I said, this draft class is very thin. Just to have a little bit of a monologue here before we get into the players. Linebacker's tough, man. I think anybody watching and trying to scout and evaluate linebackers has come to the same conclusion that I have in recent years with where the college game is. Frankly, so many of these guys are total projections to the next level, whether it's the fact that this is probably the hardest position to play in the NFL right now with the influx of play action and RPOs. The passing games in today's NFL are so directed towards attacking the middle of the field, whereas you go back 20 years ago, it was much more towards the outside. That is known as the money zone for these NFL offenses to really attack the middle of the field, put these linebackers in a bind, and it just, like I said, has made this such a challenging position to play. Not to mention the fact that defenses are coming out in nickel-based packages, which lightens up the front and forces these linebackers not to just have to do more, but do more in terms of facing offensive linemen from lighter boxes and all that stuff too. So it's really tough to take these guys from the college game where they're just younger and haven't learned as much at the position, who also in many of these situations are asked to play roles as blitz-heavy players, run and chase backside players, and not do a lot of the stuff that these NFL teams will ask of these guys. So it does make projecting these guys really tough. So what I'm going to do here today is talk about who I view as kind of the big five in this draft. All 5 of these guys I would consider on day 1 or day 2 of the draft at some point. And then I'm going to kind of just mitigate through the different types of day 3 options that are out in this draft class, and kind of hit on a bunch of guys in this video. Pause. But let's go ahead and get started with my number 1 linebacker, and I think everybody's number 1 linebacker. You certainly would be standing out on an island by yourself in this draft if you did not have Jahad Campbell as LB1 this year. Although I will say I talked about Jalen Walker as an edge rusher in my edge rush rankings video. If you want to go check that out. Some people might rank him as a linebacker. I disagree that that's the position he's going to play at the next level. But there could be an argument for Jalen Walker over Jahad Campbell. But outside of that, consensus LB1 and no different for me. Jahad Campbell out of Alabama, who I do have a first-round grade on, which does not happen for me every year, especially a true first-round grade where I'm saying, yeah, is somewhere inside the top 20. If you want to take Jahad Campbell, I'm down with it. I think generally speaking, the hit rate on first-round linebacker is very scary, and the upside isn't always worth it because there just aren't that many true difference-making linebackers in the NFL. But that is why Jahad Campbell gets the first-round grade, because he has truly, truly rare traits, and I would say enough of a floor in terms of good tape that I am certainly willing to bet on him within the first round. And the best way I like to describe Jahad Campbell, it's a little bit quirky, but I do love the analogy. He is like a create a player in Madden, where if you only got so many points to allocate to attributes, Jahad Campbell is the player you would build. Amazing speed, good size, play strength, acceleration, and on top of that, foot speed and change of direction, not just the straight line speed, but the ability to really move well out in space. He has all of it. And then on top of that, he is an exceptional tackler with what you would describe in Madden as great hit power, man. So those are probably the first traits that you are putting towards him, really in the physical capacities. But the analogy is really fun and makes things easy to understand because in the case of Jahad Campbell, at some point, you do run out of attribute points to allocate towards maybe, in Campbell's case, awareness, zone coverage. In my opinion, the block shedding lost some of those attribute points there. So that's where you're really hoping, as a 21-year-old that played a role at Alabama, that kind of like we described, it just wasn't a full-on NFL-style linebacker role. It was a lot of blitzing, sometimes lining up on the edge. So he lacks a lot of that time on task to develop the well-roundedness as a linebacker. So to talk about some of his weaknesses first, and then I want to round out the whole conversation with the stuff that he does do well. I do think the role he played and at his age, the run diagnostics need to develop, as with so many of these young linebackers. I do think when he sees things correctly, his ability to trigger and process things quickly is there. It's just, what is he processing, and is he going through his run keys in the right way and getting to the right gap on time every single snap? No, he wasn't. So the run diagnostics need to develop, and on top of that, he would trigger over aggressively and lose that run lane discipline. So you will see cutback lanes open up because he's over pursuing his gap and vacating his responsible run lanes. So in terms of the diagnostics and the discipline for his gap, that needs development. Additionally, he has all of the size and length and play strength to take on blocks and shed blocks and be a physical player between the tackles, as NFL teams will very likely ask him to play. But the reality is he just doesn't have very good technique in his ability to take on blocks. He very much is that player that knows he's a great athlete, and he wants to kind of play like a lot of those safeties do at times, where he wants to kind of, dip and try to, bounce around blocks when, man, he does have the size and strength to more consistently take guys on and command his gap much more consistently. There's a play, for example, and it's not just against offensive linemen either. There's a play, for example, against LSU where Mason Taylor, who's not the strongest, best blocking tight end, to be honest, seals him off, and the running back goes for 30, 40 yards when, man, I want to see Jahad Campbell be able to overwhelm a tight end in a situation like that. So there really are some negative plays as a run defender. And then as a coverage defender as well, he just doesn't always know what he's looking at or looking for. And I do blame the role he played at Alabama mostly for this. He spent a lot of time blitzing. And as we're going to talk about, there's a good reason for that. He is a nasty, nasty blitzer. But when they would put him into those spot drop zones or drop him into a curl flat, even from the edge, he would let routes develop behind him. He didn't show something that some of the linebackers we're going to talk about here today did show, with that zone feel, where if he's got a crossing route or a hitch route or a corner route developing behind him, he didn't always, navigate his way towards traffic to take those throwing windows away. I also felt like there were times where he would kind of get caught in no man's land and not always use his eyes to pick players up. And the way I like to describe it is cover players, not grass. Didn't always do that. So I do think there's a lot to learn from a zone coverage perspective. And because of that aggressive trigger we talked about with his diagnostics, he would get burnt off of play action quite a bit. So RPOs, play action passes where you've got those tight ends coming open over the middle of the field, he would get sucked in and bite the cheese quite a bit. And you want to see him learn better eye balance against play action at the next level. So really just so much to learn for Jahad Campbell as a real linebacker at the NFL level. But like I said, his upside is just truly, truly rare. And it's not just the athleticism. It is the fact that he does just kind of pass the eye test in so much of what he does. I've questioned if he's always putting the right information together and said he's got to develop that. But when he is reacting to whatever it is that he thinks he sees, he has incredible reaction time and just an amazing trigger, both mentally and physically, to just go get the football, whether it's a ball carrier or even out in coverage at times. He plays fast. He doesn't hesitate. And if you can just ramp up the consistency in which he's getting the right picture, it's going to be really crazy because his closing speed, his ability to just smash ball carriers towards the flat or in the backfield, it's really, really special stuff. And I love, too, that he brings such consistent tackling ability to the table. He missed just 5.9% of his tackles in his final season. I think it shows you a guy that, the speed of the game in the SEC was just not too much for him because so many guys will fly to the ball, but they struggle to break down. They struggle to strike accurately, and they miss a lot of tackles playing as fast as someone like Jahad Campbell does. Not him. He is an excellent tackler and has great instincts in that very important part of the position. So I think that does raise the floor a good bit. And then even if I question some of his zone coverage stuff needing to show development and the play action, of course, he does do two things in the passing game exceptionally well. Number one is he is as good of a man coverage linebacker that you will really find out there because he's got the size and the length and the speed. But I think what we said about, he does process information quickly. It's just, is he always processing the right information? Well, when he's on the trail and he's as a man-to-man defender, he has an excellent ability to recognize, just subtle hip turns and, stabs in players' routes. And he recognizes route breaks very quickly and reacts to it physically very quickly. We describe that as mirroring route breaks man-to-man. He does that very, very well. You obviously put not just the speed on top of that, but the change of direction. If you want to try to attack him on a wheel route up the sideline, he can turn and run better than a lot of safeties can. So he's got just really special traits as a man-to-man defender. That's going to raise his coverage floor out the gate as he hopefully learns a lot of the zone stuff. And then as a blitzer, dude, he is incredible. There's a reason a lot of people have suggested maybe he should take more of a Hassan Reddick career arc and play more edge linebacker. I think he can be a linebacker, an off-ball linebacker, but I kind of agree. Like, he absolutely could go the edge route because his bend, he has a very similar trait that like Jalen Walker has, where he just kind of gets low, dips and rips, and just kind of has that torque ability as a blitzer that's really special. Running backs trying to pick him up. With his explosiveness and his size, he will detonate a running back if you try to pick him up. He's got a speed move around the edge. Like he does have a lot to bring to the table as a blitzer. So if nothing else, like you might get some ups and downs as a zone defender out the gate and maybe forever. That's the thing, right? But that's got to develop. But man him up, blitz him. You're going to get some stuff from him on third downs anyway. So really had a fun time watching Jahad Campbell. It's not every year I get a first-round linebacker with the upside of a guy like this. And really a guy I believe in, even if, just like any of these young linebackers, it's probably going to take a couple years to really get up to the speed of the NFL game. The only other little quick note is he did have a shoulder injury from his bowl game that he did need surgery on in March. It might delay his entry in terms of rookie minicamp and maybe even into training camp. So that's one other question mark just to throw in the profile, but I don't think we're too worried about that at this point in time. So I do have Jahad Campbell in his own tier as the number one linebacker in this draft as a first round grade. And then I have a whole nother tier for a whole lone player here as my number two linebacker, the only other player in this draft with a second round grade from me. And that is Carson Schwessinger out of UCLA. Got to him late, doing this position group late, and he was a nice little kind of dessert on the scouting process, if you will. I thought I had kind of seen all of my top 50 players at this point a week before the draft, but I think Schwessinger, I still got to do the offensive lineman before I finish my top 50 board, my final top 50 board, but I do think Schwessinger is going to crack that list. He, as well, has a ton of potential, and especially as a coverage defender, a ton to like. Man, I genuinely don't know the last college linebacker that I watched that had as good of zone feel and just IQ from zone to take stuff away, paired with oily movements, the ability to turn his hips and just flow in space. I was thinking back to like maybe Blake Cashman, who I had as a first round grade and a higher grade on Devin Bush in that draft class. One of my OG great draft takes. Never wrong, just early in that situation. Took a little while for Cashman to get there. But maybe he reminded me a little bit of that with him. But just wowed by his zone coverage tape. You just don't see that from so many of these college linebackers, kind of as we described with someone like Jahad Campbell. So that's just kind of the first thing you got to mention with him. Even though he only started 1 year at UCLA, he was a former walk-on. Like, the fact that he's this good of an athlete as a walk-on really makes you wonder what was going on with the high school recruiting stuff. You know, sometimes these guys just slip through the cracks. But for a 1 year starter, just the way that he broke down route combinations and flowed with routes in coverage. And then he has those active eyes too. When he gets stuck in no man's land and the play is 3-4 seconds in, he doesn't just stand there and kind of wait for the play to come to him. He goes and finds work as a coverage defender. So I really like everything he brings to the table there. And then he's got good speed. We didn't get a 40 time from him. But I do think he's got good sideline to sideline speed. I wish we did, because if he came out and ran like a 4.52, I might have a late first round. I almost certainly would have a late first round grade on him there, but I don't know that he has elite speed. I think he's got very good speed. But with those nice, agility and change of direction skills, he's a good man-to-man coverage player as well. And then that exceptional change of direction ability as well comes into play with him as a blitzer. He has tremendous bend. They would scream him around the corner, and he would look like some of those bendy, like Donovan Ezeraku and some of these bendy edge rushers in this draft. He had some speed rushes around the edge where he just gets low and dips and rips, and tackles couldn't get their hands on him. So, he could do that. He would, really attack running backs as well as a blitzer too. So I think there's a completeness to his game as a coverage linebacker out the gate that you just don't find in many linebackers at all out of college. Now, the holdup with him is the run defense is all over the map. Man, there are some plays that get you fired up with Carson Schwessinger, and there are some plays that just kind of make you hold your breath and say, that's not going to play in the NFL. He is a ridiculously aggressive linebacker. I feel like he still plays the run like he's that same undrafted, a walk-on linebacker that is trying to make a splash in practice and impress the coaching staff. But it's like, you made it, Carson. You're the starter. You don't need to be the guy that blows up in the backfield every single play. He goes after the first thing he sees, especially in the run game. And I'll circle back and say it does hurt him in times in play action, but I did kind of like the way he defended play action, because he was pretty quick to recognize when the back wasn't getting the ball and would dip back, and really had a good understanding of what sort of play action route concepts were coming his way, and he would look to take those away pretty well. So still could take the cheese a little bit less, but it didn't fully hurt him as a play action defender. But in terms of getting to the right hole, maintaining his gap, playing through his read keys consistently, all over the damn map. Now, sometimes he would trigger quickly and have those exciting tackles for loss and highlight plays against the run. You could put together a run defense cut up for Carson Schwessinger that makes you think he should be going in the top 15 of the draft. But if you go through his tape, as I did 3 games on him, you do see a lot of negative plays, and you're just going to have to round out that aggressiveness. And then there's one really critical conversation we have to have about Carson Schwessinger, and that is that he has bulked up since his final year at UCLA, and it does add a little bit of fog of war and murkiness to his evaluation here, because on tape at UCLA, I thought his play strength was really poor. There were snaps where I felt like he looked like a wide receiver out there, just kind of thin, and he would go up to a blocker and just get drowned out by the block, just disappear against the run game. And I was really worried off the college tape about his ability to take on blocks and show play strength in the run game. Now, he's put on 15 pounds from the 225 pounds he was listed at UCLA. And I don't doubt that he played at 225 pounds because of what I just described. He looked small. So to me, that is why he didn't run his 40, because he's bulked up. But it does just make things curious in terms of, A, is that a great thing? Because now he's going to be a much more physical run defender that can play with more of a conservative approach and take on blocks at 240 pounds instead of 220. That would obviously be great. But you do also have to ask, how much does that hurt the change of direction and the bend as a blitzer and the ability to move in space and that part of his game that was the defining strength in his game? So does bulking up make him play slower? Is that why he didn't run the 40? It's something that you hope will be a good thing, that he can bulk up and maintain the athleticism and play the run better, but it certainly doesn't always go in that direction. Playing at a different weight can go in many different ways. So that is very curious to me, and was just enough of a question mark, again, to kind of keep first round grades off of him for him. But there is, of course, like I said, not to be too redundant here, but hope that size can make him a better run defender. The one big saving grace for him in run defense is he is, like Jihad Campbell, an exceptional tackler. Not quite as good of a missed tackle rate, but still very good. 7.5% in his final season. Will absolutely play if he can keep that up. He comes in with wide strikes, and because he's quick in his lower half, he's able to stay square and run his feet with that agility through contact. So he's a really good tackler, really good coverage player. Just got to get more consistency as a run defender. So for me, that put him in the second round. I think if you wanted to throw him out there as a starter right away, if you have someone that's more of a run defense forward player next to him, you could do it. If you're a team that your number one linebacker is more of a coverage-oriented guy, you might want to stash Schlesinger for a year to kind of figure everything out. But that's my range on him. Pro comps, I actually went with Diane Henley, who ended up going in the third round a couple years ago, but he had a really nice second year for the Chargers. I don't know if that's a low comp or a high comp, but he does remind me of Diane Henley as a prospect. And then as a high comp, not to scout the helmet here, but Eric Kendricks really fits the mold of that elite zone IQ, the fluid movements out in space, but also maybe not the best run defender. Actually, a lot of parallels there for the former UCLA Bruin in Eric Kendricks, who was at a point in time a top 5 linebacker in the NFL. So it's lofty praise, but I wouldn't rule it out for him getting there. So I really liked Schlesinger. He kind of saved this linebacker class for me, getting to him late. But it wasn't a full save because the lack of depth in this linebacker class shows up here as we go to my third tier of players. I have 2 linebackers with true third-round grades here, guys that I think could be starters in the league, but do have some certain weaknesses that could hold them back from getting there. So I do have the same grade here on my LB3 and LB4. So here at 3A, I have Demetrius Knight Jr. out of South Carolina. And I actually like Demetrius Knight a good bit. I just wish he was like these other guys, 22 years old with a much longer runway to develop, whereas he is 25 years old and still has some areas to grow as a player. He's been in college football for 6 years, started at Georgia Tech as a quarterback, actually a Wildcat quarterback, made a transition to linebacker there, I believe, but didn't really crack the lineup. Ends up going to Charlotte. Shout out Charlotte, by the way. Miss you guys down there. But plays there and then transfers up for his final season at South Carolina, where he really broke through. So for him, I do think the fact that he is 25, he can legally rent a car, and he was a former, a quarterback, a triple option quarterback, but a quarterback nonetheless. He has experience seeing the field from that perspective. I think it does bring a unique asset for him as a linebacker. But that QB experience plus the age, I do think it shows in kind of his well-roundedness as a linebacker. And I actually have a higher impact grade as far as how good he is day one in the NFL over Carson Schlesinger, because I think as a run defender, he shows a lot more stability, though I don't know that the coverage stuff is quite as good as Schlesinger. And of course, being 3 years older is a part of the conversation here. But he is a really nice athlete. He's 6'1 and a half, 235 pounds. He has excellent length, 32 and 5/8 inch arms. He ran a 4.58 40 at the combine. Like, checks a lot of boxes athletically speaking. And you go to his tape and it's like, where do you want to start? All right, he's a pass coverage player. Like I said, I think the QB background shows at times in his zone feel. It's just a little bit up and down for him. There are some really exciting plays where he knows exactly what route is developing. He takes away a crossing route over his head, or he's able to trigger downhill in the quick game. There's other times where he's not getting his way in front of passing lanes, and he was attacked in coverage a little bit more. As a man defender, he does have great athleticism to stick in a guy's hip pocket. Play action, I think he's got decent eye balance to defend that as well. Sometimes he took the cheese. Sometimes he was able to, know what an offense was trying to do to him. As that former Georgia Tech quarterback, he's got a respect for the play action game. Where he's best as a pass defender is as a blitzer, where he is nasty. He just rushes with his hair on fire. He will blow up running backs. Shows a lot of hip fluidity to bend around the edge as well. So I really like what you're going to be able to do with him as a blitzer out the gate. And then as a run defender, I think there's a lot to like as well. He's a solid tackler. He's got pretty good diagnostics. Definitely see the former quarterback in him. Being able to break down the run game and understanding what pulling guards means for where he needs to attack. Triggers pretty well. And he plays with really good discipline. You don't see a ton of cutbacks getting exploited in his range. He's able to play with a nice balance in that way, where he will stay aggressive, he'll go after the ball, but not gonna overdo it in the way that some of these guys do. Where he's lacking is, I want to see him take on blocks much better. That's the biggest thing for him. And if he can do that, if he can develop that at 25 years old, you're going to be really in business with him. But he does dodge blocks, and he doesn't play up to his 235-pound listed weight there. He plays a lot lighter than that, in my opinion. You also see that C+ play strength. So I do wonder if there's room even to bulk up his frame even more. Man, if you could get him up to 240 pounds and really take on blocks well, you are absolutely in business with him. But is he maxed out at this age? That's a legitimate question, right? But you do see him get drowned out in the run, and just doesn't quite negotiate blocks between the tackles as well as you'd like to see to maybe put more of a second round grade on him. But a very complete profile. If he either was better at taking on blocks or was 22 years old, I'd probably have him more in the same range as Carson Schwessinger. But you pair those two things together, and it did ding him down a little bit. But I do like him. I think he could be a starter in the league. I actually compared him. I guess Colts fans can keep an eye maybe on Demetrius Knight being a fit for you, because the two pro comps that made sense for me were Anthony Walker as a low-end comp, who was, he's been a nice high floor kind of LB3 type and has started some games throughout his career. I think it's a nice floor projection for Demetrius Knight. But on the upside, I think his physical tools are very similar to Bobby Okereke, who developed into a really nice starter. So there is upside there for him to be kind of a LB1 type if everything goes right for him. Both those guys, Walker and Okereke, 6'1", 230 pounds, started their career as mid-round picks for the Indianapolis Colts. But like I said, my number 4 linebacker shares the same grade as a third-round guy and a hopeful starter in the league, but a very different player in many ways, and that is Chris Paul Jr. out of Ole Miss. I actually really like Chris Paul. I think he does a lot of things well. Problem is he's 222 pounds and has like 1 percentile arm length. So he's got serious size deficiencies working against him. And also he played behind a very good Ole Miss front. All 4 of those starters on that D-line are going to get drafted this year. And, that plays well when you're 222 pounds with his play style, where he's a great run and chase player, but he got to be out in space quite a bit because some of those blocks were getting, some of those lanes were getting opened up by those guys up front. But if you are able to kind of scheme around his lack of size and keep him out in space, Paul has, probably behind Jahad Campbell, the best instincts in this draft. I would say especially in coverage, but he does some nice stuff in the run game too, but especially out in coverage, man. Like, you run a swing pass or try to run quick game at him. Even some of the plays he has in zone, recognizing routes and keying in on stuff. He's got that, like, he passes the eye test. He's a football player, like all those cliches, but there is something about him. Like, he just has that playmaking feel. There's a play, was it LSU? I can't remember exactly who they're playing, but he's in man-to-man on a tight end, and the ball's a little high, and he jumps up and swats it towards the defensive lineman that was just turning around to see what was developing behind him. And he kind of volleyball swats the ball to the D-line. There's various plays on tape with that with Chris Paul where it's just like his game awareness is really, really nice. And it shows up in run defense too. Like, even though he's small and he is not going to be able to take on blocks really at all, he tries his best because he does have a strong torso and he'll really throw himself into blocks. And sometimes if he times it right, he can get that initial knockback on an offensive lineman and create just enough space to kind of, mitigate a block and slip off and make a play. But for the most part, he's going to get swallowed up in the run game. But there's times like as a gap shooter and a penetrator where, he can just use the film study or maybe the right guard is leaning or whatever. He knows a puller's coming. And instead of some linebackers that'll let the puller through and get up and climb to him, he'll shoot that gap and make a play in the backfield. Or if it's an outside run, he'll outrun the tight end or the tackle trying to seal him off. Like, he does have really high-end plays against the run. He's very aggressive with it. So it's, when a guy is just kind of chasing after everything he sees and always trying to anticipate and kind of mitigate his lack of size, it's tough to give him too much credit for run diagnostics. I give him a B-. But there are plays where he guesses wrong and finds himself out of position as well. I would just say he's a very, very boom or bust run defender, but a very good coverage player on top of that. And there are defenses and certain coordinators that can let a guy like this succeed. Now, my pro comp on him is Quan Alexander, who had a good pro career, started for probably 4 or 5 years, and was that same kind of bolt of lightning playmaking boom or bust linebacker. I saw a lot of that in Chris Paul Jr., but he's certainly not going to be for everybody, especially with that arm length, man. Under 30 inches is tough for a linebacker, but some teams won't be as scared by the size and will be willing to roll the dice on him. And for those teams that aren't afraid of the size, I think third round is comfortable for me, especially considering how bad this linebacker class is. And at some point, you got to kind of roll the dice and try to find somebody out of this class. And I think the tape on Chris Paul is worth the gamble in that range. Oh, and by the way, not to drone on here, but despite the arm length, another thing I really like about Chris Paul, really consistent tackler. That needed to be said. I didn't sneak that in there. But that stands out for a guy that you would expect with shorter arms at 222 pounds to miss a lot of tackles, but that's just kind of the football awareness thing, right? He comes in, he hits you hard, he runs his feet, and didn't miss a lot of tackles in college, which definitely helped him get into that third round range. But let's go to my number 5 linebacker, and this is the last player we're going to kind of truly highlight here before sort of running through your sort of best of the rest day 3 options. But Danny Stutzman out of Oklahoma was the last guy in this class that, 3rd to a 4th round grade. So if you took him in the 3rd round, I would say, okay, that's fine. Let's see if he can develop his weaknesses and become a starter someday. But there is some upside with Danny Stutzman. He's 6'3", 233 pounds, 32-inch arms is certainly good enough. Comes out and runs a 4.52 at the combine, really explosive in a straight line. But I will say, athletically speaking, probably the core reason, on top of some other stuff we'll talk about, but the core reason Stutzman came in below these other 4 players is he is a lot stiffer in terms of turning his hips, moving, showing those fluid movements in space, the oily hips to kind of turn and run with your back turned. He doesn't quite have that athletic upside of some of these other guys. And that's really reflected in like his man coverage, especially. Like, he just can't quite mirror quicker route breaks from good route runners that he's trying to cover, not just in man, but in zone match situations as well. And on top of that, not quite the sort of bendy, loopy blitzer that some of these guys are as well. So just from an athletic standpoint, he's got a lot to like, but that is going to be a big difference between him and some of these other guys is those tighter hips in his transitions. But, overall with Stutzman, a lot of these guys, I like to kind of pull up their PFF profile before I watch just to kind of know what I'm getting into. I like to kind of see, because I try to do 3 games on these guys, so I try to see I try to do their best game, their worst game, and like an average game. So I like to pull up the PFF profile and I get a glimpse at the grades. And in Danny Stutzman's case, and sometimes what I end up watching matches what those grades said. And in Danny Stutzman's case, I was really surprised kind of what my opinions were on him after watching his tape. Because he had a 90.9 run defense grade in the elite territory last year for PFF, but a 46.3 coverage grade. So, I see this, 6'3", 240-pound white dude with those grades, and I'm like, all right, I know what we're getting into. Like, let's throw the neck roll on and go smash some people. And that's not fully what I saw from him. There's a little bit of that with him, with the heat-seeking missile type. But I actually was much more impressed by his coverage ability than his consistency in run defense. He's actually a lot like Carson Schlesinger, just without the change of direction and the smooth hips. But I actually really liked his zone feel. I felt like Oklahoma asked him to play in a ton of space in these spread out Big 12 games, and he actually, flowed with traffic really well and took away a lot of throwing opportunities. And, PFF only grades your coverage reps when you're getting targeted. So there's a lot of good reps on the film that aren't going towards that PFF coverage grade that ended up at a 46.3, but the film tells a different story there, where I actually thought he did show good route recognition and routes would be developing around him, and he would take stuff away and force quarterbacks to look off of his area. So I really liked his zone feel and his IQ in that area. He's played, I think more than anybody we've talked about here today. Let's see, did Chris Paul play more? 2,500 snaps for Stutzman. Yeah, Chris Paul only played 15. I mean, it's still a good number, but played almost 1,600 snaps. But Stutzman's got the most playing time out of the top 5 guys on this list. And I think that shows in particular in his zone IQ. So I really like that. But as far as the rest of his coverage, there were some areas where he was going to get dinged and received some of those negatively graded plays for sure, that of course attributed to that 46 PFF coverage grade. I mentioned, the stiffer hips, the man-to-man. Guys would snap off routes and he would lose in zone match or man-to-man situations. But also just play action. Like, he's aggressive. He is a heat-seeking missile. We're going to talk about his run defense and some of the stuff we don't like about that. But he takes the cheese. He gets sucked in, and guys would drop an RPO or a play action middle of the field route right over his head. So, that's something that he's going to have to develop some better balance there, or these NFL teams are going to pick him a new one, tear him a new one, rather. And then as a blitzer, he's big and fast, but and he had some sacks, he had some pressures and all that stuff, but I don't know. I didn't think he had the best instincts as a blitzer, and I do think the kind of stiffer movements hurt his ability to work his way around blocks. So maybe a little bit more one-dimensional in coverage, but that one dimension is what he's going to be asked to do in the NFL, depending on where he lands, anywhere from 80 to 60% of the time. Even the most man-to-man heavy teams are only running man coverage 40% of the time. So I really like his zone coverage. That's really the core reason of why he made this list. On top of the fact that he does hopefully have upside to develop as a run defender. He got better in all 4 years, according to PFF, with his run defense grade. Now, I can't confirm that. I didn't go back and watch him in 2022, 2023, but you are hoping that development comes nonetheless. So aggressive, right? Just like Chris Paul, he's going to go after what he sees. B- run diagnostics, kind of the same idea where he can see it, he can trigger, he will go without hesitation, and he will make some really exciting plays at the line of scrimmage, towards the sideline, in the backfield. He was near the top of college football in defensive stops, which is a metric I really put a lot of weight in for college linebackers. I think it's a nod to your instincts and playmaking ability in the run game. PFF charts defensive stops as tackles or assisted tackles that constitute a failure for the offense. So I think that's like 3 yards or less. But yeah, Stutzman was 12th in college football in total defensive stops in all of college football, not just in eligible prospects, with 55. So there's a lot of playmaking there with him, but you do see him vacate his gap every other play. Like he is the definition of an over aggressive linebacker. I think there was a ton of cutback lanes, a lot of plays that I think are plays that good backs in the NFL are going to take advantage of, because he's leaving massive run lanes wide open, trying to make a play. And on top of that, his tackling consistency is not what we've seen for the other guys on this list. It's not horrible. He gets a C+ grade for tackling for me, but he did miss 12% of his tackles, which is I would say subpar. And I think that's because he's taking these really aggressive angles. He's not always able to square up and come in at the right angle. But he lacks some of that foot speed and change of direction to really square guys up and run his feet through the tackles. So just a little bit more sloppy as a run defender, I would say, even if the high-end plays are there. And likewise, because of some of that aggressiveness, he would do the same thing we said with like Demetrius Knight, or what someone like Chris Paul has to do, in that he tries to out-athlete blockers and tries to avoid blocks and shoot holes and stuff, but he ends up taking himself out of the play quite a bit by trying to take guys on with proper technique to negotiate with blockers. So yeah, the run defense for me was just very inconsistent, very up and down. I think the aggressiveness and the total profile there needs to get cleaned up from NFL coaching coming out of the Big 12 here, before I'm comfortable with him on the football field. But obviously the speed and the zone feel and the the aggressive nature, there's a lot to like in there for sure. So I think he could get there. Reminds me a lot of Cody Barton coming out. Was a 3rd round pick. He took his time. He had to bounce around the league. To me, Stutzman falls into that category most likely with a lot of players like Cody Barton that come in as mid-round picks with an athletic profile, a lot to like, but frankly take 4 or 5 years to really figure out how to play linebacker in the NFL, and then someone ends up getting good value off of the player after they've developed. And Barton's a guy that always had, some of that feel and zone, but and the speed, but really struggled as a run defender and as a tackler for a long time. And last year in Denver, I liked a lot of stuff he did. So that's the pro comp I went with on Stutzman. And again, that's kind of the 5 highlight players from this linebacker draft that are really worth talking about, in my opinion. But I do want to kind of give you sort of the groupings with the rest of this draft class, because there's some certain flavors, depending on what you're looking for, certain roles, special teamers, developmental guys, and just a lot of names that I think you guys are going to want to know my opinions on. Now, I do want to remind you guys, if you want my full write-ups on any of these guys, you want the information you've seen on the screen for these previous 5 players for any of the remaining players that we're going to hit on here, get all that on my draft guide on Patreon. I watched and wrote up 21 linebackers. Let's see, 16 of which have pro comps in there, so you can get the linebackers, and still got to do the remaining offensive linemen, but obviously this is when that whole draft guide's coming together. So if you want to take that with you to the draft stream, a guy gets drafted, you want to see what I saw in that player and all the information, you can get access to all of that at my Patreon. It's patreon.com/thatfranchiseguy. Also going to be putting out 7-round mock drafts for all 32 teams over the course of this weekend there for the MVP tier on Patreon. So this is the time to support the channel if you enjoy the draft content, and you want to show a little bit of love back my way as well. I wouldn't be able to do what I do without my amazing Patreon members there. But Yeah, let's just kind of rip through some names here and try to cluster some of these guys together. So my next two linebackers that I do have 4th to 5th round grades on, so LB6, LB7, Sean Dolak out of Buffalo. I think a lot of people were hoping was going to get brought up here for me. Ended up my LB6 because, as we're going to talk about with these guys, I just, I say for a lot of these players, this guy has a lot to like. For the majority of the remaining linebackers in this draft, it's kind of the opposite, where it's like there's not a lot to like. You're just hoping. In Sean Dolak's case, he's one of the remaining players where there is a lot to like, but he is very small, 6 foot, 220 pounds, played at Buffalo, and 30-inch arms. He's built like Chris Paul. So in terms of the size and kind of having to play around it basically, and you it's not a guy that you're projecting to have consistent success between the tackles in the league, but man, he's super instinctive. I love his coverage ability. He's pretty quick. He did run a 4.63, so he's got some speed, but I think some of the plays he made in coverage are some of the best plays any defender made this year. He had multiple of those interceptions where he's like a lurking underneath zone defender or even like a QB spy, and he just the ball's fired over his head and he just jumps up and plucks it. Those balls that should be batted passes that turn into interceptions. He had 2 of those, and I think his overall just coordination as an athlete really stands out. So as a kind of weak side backer, lurking kind of instinctive coverage defender whose run defense is better than it should be for someone his size, he's really instinctive to find the ball. He kind of reminds me at times some of these like really short running backs where he can just kind of get low and dip around blocks and find his way to the ball with great instincts. It doesn't always work. He's a little bit more boom or busty because he doesn't have the size to really take on blocks. He's kind of got his own unique style. I think he can be a splash play defender in the run game and hope like maybe a good coverage defender. I think there's a little bit of like Terrell Bernard in there with Sean Dolak. I wrote down for my pro comp on Sean Dolak, Avon Pace minus the blitzing. Avon Pace is known for his blitzing as an undrafted player for the Vikings, but he's kind of an underrated coverage and run defender as well. So, he's small and played at Buffalo. Might not be starting in the league, but I did like the tape. So Dolak made the list, number 6. And then Barrett Carter out of Clemson is ranked right there with him with a 4th to a 5th round grade. Former like big name guy, you're way too early, first round mock drafts kind of thing. Different player, but the same kind of idea. 4th, 5th round grade. You're not drafting him assuming he's going to start, but if he surprises and develops well, it wouldn't be out of this world if Barrett Carter ended up starting in the league. He's smaller, 6 foot, 230 pounds, but he's sturdy, and I like that he plays lower to the earth at 6 feet, but he's got pretty good arm length at 32 inches, and I think his arms are pretty filled out. So he does some nice stuff in the run defense side of things, and as a coverage defender, he's played a good bit, and I think there was some good flashes with his zone. As a blitzer, he's got that natural leverage. So Barrett Carter was okay. I want to see him take on blocks better. I think he has the length and strength to do it a lot better, but he really tried to kind of use his bendiness and kind of low to the earth mentality to kind of dodge blocks and be a shifty run defender as opposed to a strong one. So I want to see a little bit more from him in that phase if he's ever going to start. Then I've got kind of a cluster of more like developmental options with some pretty intriguing upside, but guys that I just don't think are ready to play. So Smile Mondin out of Georgia. I don't know if I'm saying that name right. But another guy I've got a 4th to a 5th round grade on. Super athletic guy, a little lighter, 6'2", 224 pounds. One of these guys, you think back to my intro, players that just didn't really play real linebacker. That was Mondin. He played a role that was probably closer to like a big nickel safety and a traditional like throwback weak side linebacker than anything you're going to see in the league. I think he only played like 140 snaps as an inside linebacker, and I'm unable to sort through how many of those were as a blitzing defender because he did blitz a lot. So in terms of like, can he step in and break down the run game and take on blocks and even like show the zone feel that you would want from a true linebacker position. It's just a tough projection for sure, but he's got the run and chase tackling ability, did not miss a lot of tackles. And as a man coverage defender, as a blitzer, he did do some really nice stuff, taking stuff away as a man cover defender, covering tight ends. He did a lot of that. So, there's definitely some explosiveness to like with Mondin as a developmental early day 3 pick. He's got durability questions, though. That's a big thing with him. He missed a lot of time. Going back to high school, shout out to Dane Brugler for the Beast. You're able to read through some of these backgrounds on some of these guys. Information like, missed his senior season due to an injury on top of missing time at Georgia. So he's got durability concerns for sure. But I like him as a day 3 flyer on athleticism. He ran a 4.58 and a 130-inch broad jump there for Mondin. And then in a similar cluster, but someone I didn't like his tape quite as much, we're now getting into 5th to 6th round range. I have Teddy Buchanan out of California, tested incredibly well, and you load up the film, and he moves super well on film. He moves like his California State counterpart, Carson Schlesinger, in terms of the oily hips and the ability to just, navigate out in space really pretty, but really was underwhelmed by his tape. I think he's kind of a ground up project in terms of run diagnostics, and I was really underwhelmed by his zone feel. I didn't think he did a good job taking plays away in coverage. So that was Teddy Buchanan out of California, just kind of your classic day 3 traits-based developmental prospect. Technically we're still inside the top 10 linebackers here, and we're talking about a 5th to a 6th round grade on Buchanan. So things are falling off pretty steep here. But then after that, I've got like this cluster of 5 guys that are all, in my opinion, like likely backups that are kind of like higher floor players as opposed to those more traitsy guys we just talked about. But 5th to 6th round grades on all of these guys. Chandler Martin out of Memphis, Cody Lindenberg out of Minnesota, Kobe King out of Penn State, Cody Simon out of Ohio State, and Jack Kaiser out of Notre Dame. There's just, these guys are solid players. They're smart players. Just your kind of snapshot look at these guys. Chandler Martin is a shorter, stockier, speedy guy. He ran a 4.54. C-ball, hit ball type of linebacker, but a lot to learn in terms of diagnostics and zone coverage and all that stuff. Coming out of Memphis, he's a maybe type of pick who had a lot of production at Memphis. Then you got Cody Lindenberg out of Minnesota. Honestly, if he could stay healthy, he maybe could have snuck up to more of that like Sean Dolak, Barrett Carter, early day 3 conversation, but more of a mid-round day 3, a mid-range day 3 type of guy, Cody Lindenberg, but a lot of size, leadership, play diagnostics, like smart player. But it just, he gets hurt a lot and doesn't move that well. Ran a 4.71. Then I have Kobe King out of Penn State, big, thumping type, good player, takes on blocks, breaks down the run well, but really poor coverage tape, doesn't do a good job really taking much away from the linebacker position at all. Cody Simon, my pro comp on him was Blake Martinez, a technically sound player. He actually got the highest discipline grade from me in this entire class. Cody Simon out of Ohio State, but one of those guys that just kind of lets the play come to him. Not going to bust his assignment, but very low in terms of like average depth of tackle. Kind of a cleanup man at linebacker with decent size. And then Jack Kaiser, kind of a headhunting guy, big name out of Notre Dame in the big run that they had this year. But yeah, the tape was all right for me. Can play aggressive, can hit, loves to tackle, 4.67 40. I wasn't blown away by Jack Kaiser. And then, man, I will shout out 3 more players that are all kind of lumped in as day 3, late day 3, 6th, 7th round grades for me. Guys that don't have size, but are really good run and chase tacklers that you're hoping their game can round out. So we're now at LB 15. Jeffrey Bassa out of Oregon, Nick Martin out of Oklahoma State, who I might be a little low on. I know some people really like Nick Martin, but you got to go back to 2023 for him because he missed a lot of time in 2024. But he's, Nick Martin's 5'11", 220 pounds, and the coverage was not very good for him. So it's like a special teamer to me, unless the coverage stuff develops from him. But he did run a 4.53 at the combine, which is always good to see. And then another speedster, Kane Medrano out of UCLA, sixth-year player that kind of broke out late, ran a 4.46 at the combine. Very much a run and chase type of player. So for me, those are like kind of undersized 6th, 7th round guys. Bring them in as special teamers and see if and they could thrive on special teams because they're very good run and chase tacklers, but guys that you're hoping develop in time. So there's your kind of day 3 crop and some quick thoughts on all those guys. But I hope you guys enjoyed the linebacker breakdown here. And we got one position group left. I'm going to do the linemen all together in one final episode. I've got a bunch of other video ideas that I'm trying to really crank out the content to you guys here. I want to polish up, touch up on my wide receiver rankings, talk about some more players there. I want to do one more mock draft. I want to try and talk some sleepers. So pretty much every day at this point, you're going to be getting a draft video, and then, of course, the draft stream over next weekend. So do make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss any of that. And please do hit that like button on the way out. Let me know your thoughts. Who are your favorite linebackers in this draft class? Are there any names that you think are sleepers that I maybe didn't watch? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. But until next time, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. Peace out.